My name is Laurel Ingram, and I was 34 years old the day I found out my family had already spent my inheritance. I was standing on Main Street in Alder Bay, Michigan, with my rucksack still on my shoulder, staring at a sign that had not existed when I left. Gold letters. New awning. My dead grandmother's name hanging over the door of a restaurant my sister owned. Grandma Ruth left me her lake house. $500,000 of pine and shoreline, my name typed right there in her will. In a sentence a lawyer had read out loud. My parents sold it. My sister spent it. Then my sister sent me a message that said, "Thanks for your service." I did not answer her. I did not answer anybody. What I did instead took 11 months. It cost me every dollar I had and every person I came home for. And it ended in a courtroom in Cadillac with my sister sliding out of her chair onto the floor. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, the channel where the quiet ones finally say the thing out loud and the family finds out what it cost. If a story ever hits close to home for you, drop a comment and let me know. And be sure to subscribe, because you are going to want to hear how this one ends. Fort Campbell to Alder Bay is 640 miles, 10 hours if you do not stop, and I never stop. I drove it overnight, the way I have driven everything for 12 years, because darkness is honest and gas stations at 3 in the morning do not ask you where you have been. I am a combat medic. 68 whiskey, 12 years in, staff sergeant since I was 29. It has ruined me in one specific way. I count other people's breathing without deciding to. Cashiers, drunks, my own mother. Somebody starts talking and part of my brain is already timing their chest. I had a rucksack, a pair of boots that had been to 2 continents, and a small brass key strung on my dog tag chain. My grandmother mailed me that key when I was 27 and stationed at Kandahar, in a padded envelope with a Michigan postmark and a note in her big slanted handwriting. For whenever you get tired of being useful. I laughed at it. I wore it anyway, through 2 rotations and a lot of countries that did not have lakes. Here is the arithmetic of my family, and you should have it up front, because everything after this is people arguing about arithmetic. 12 years, 9 trips home, $400 a month, every month, wired from whatever base I was on, for my mother's pills and my father's roof, and once for my sister's stove. I never missed a payment. I also never asked them for a single thing, not once, not ever. And I want you to hold on to that, because a woman who has never asked for anything is not generous. She is just very far away, and she has found a very expensive way to stay there. I had been home exactly once in the last 4 years. 4 days of emergency leave for her funeral, and then a flight back. That was 11 months ago. 4 days out of 19 months. And my father can do that arithmetic too, and he has. And he is not wrong. I was not driving up for a funeral this time. I was driving up because I had finally asked my sister a question and gotten an answer. I hit Main Street at 6:40 in the morning, which in Alder Bay means the bakery light is on and nothing else is. I knew every storefront on that block the way you know your own teeth. Dorsey's Hardware, the insurance office with the dead fern, and where the video rental place used to be, where I paid late fees in 1999 with paper route money, there was now a restaurant. Not a diner. A restaurant. New awning, black and cream, reclaimed wood, filament bulbs behind the glass, still burning from the night before. And across the front, in gold letters somebody had paid an actual sign company to make. It said, Ruth's Table. Beside the register, blown up bigger than life and lit from below like a shrine, was my grandmother's face. That picture was from her 75th birthday. I took it. I was on leave, and she made me use her camera because she did not trust phones. Now she was hanging in a window on Main Street, watching the street she complained about for 50 years, selling somebody's brunch. I stood there 4 minutes with my ruck still on. A woman walked her dog past me and said good morning, and I did not answer, which is not like me. Here is what I could not make fit. My grandmother died 11 months ago. This place had been open since June, which is about 6 weeks, and the paint was so new I could smell it from the sidewalk. which meant that while I was in Poland running sick call and eating dining facility eggs, my sister Bethany, who had washed dishes in this town since she was 15 and had never in her life had more than a few $1,000s at one time, had put $340,000 into a building. Bethany did not have that. Bethany has never had that. Nobody in my family has ever had that. So where does a woman like my sister get money like that? I already knew, if I am honest, and I had known since May. Poland. A base outside Powids, gray sky, gray buildings, a latrine that was the only place on the compound where the signal was strong enough to load a picture. That is where I was standing when my sister's text came in, at 11 at night, with my boots off and my feet on the tile. She sent a photo first. Scaffolding, a half-hung awning, her in the middle of it with her arms out and her hair up, grinning like a kid on a diving board. She was happy. That is the part people leave out when they tell these stories. She was so happy. Underneath it, she wrote that they were opening in a few weeks, and that she had named it for Grandma and that she wished I could see it. And I typed back the only thing I actually wanted to know. Where did the money come from? I watched the dots. They went for a long time, longer than the answer needed, and then they stopped, and then they started again. And what finally came through was this. Thanks for your service. That was all she wrote. And here is the thing I need you to understand, because it took me the better part of a year to understand it myself. She was not being cruel. There was no knife in it. My sister thought that was a joke, a warm one, the kind of thing you say to a big sister who is far away and does something noble, the kind of thing the guy at the hardware store says when he sees your plates. She meant it as affection. That is what still takes the air out of me. I set the phone face down on the sink, put my boots back on, and went and covered somebody's shift. It took 8 more weeks before I understood what my sister was actually thanking me for. My parents live on Hale Street, 1.2 miles off Main, in the house I grew up in. I went for dinner that first night because that is what you do. Pot roast, paper napkins folded into triangles, the same wall clock, the same brown chair with the same dent in it, everything exactly the way I left it at 22, which should be comforting and is not. My mother, Marlene, is 61 and has been the secretary at Grace Lutheran for 23 years. And she has exactly one thing she says about me. She said it 3 times in 40 minutes. We are so proud of her. Not proud of you. Proud of her, said to my father, said to the pot roast, said to the room, while I sat 8 feet away holding a fork. My mother has talked about me in the third person my entire adult life. It is like being a photograph that got up and came to dinner. My father, Gordon, is 63, retired road commission foreman, hands like split firewood. He barely spoke. He asked me if I was sleeping. It was the only question anybody asked me that had a real answer behind it, and I did not have a good one, so I lied and said fine. Then I put my fork down and asked about the lake house, and the room changed temperature. My mother got very busy with the dishes. My father looked at me for a long moment with no anger in his face at all, which was worse, and then he said it, flat and calm, the way he would tell a crew a road was closed. It's handled, Laurel. It's been handled for a year. Handled. Not sold, not settled, not decided, handled. My father chose that word on purpose, the way he chose every word, and I sat there with the clock ticking and tried to figure out what he thought he had handled. Here is where you expect me to tell you my father got defensive. He did not. He got up, went to the hutch, and came back with a ledger. Blue cover, 3-ring, tabbed dividers, the whole thing organized the way a man organizes 41 years of county paperwork. He set it on the table and pushed it across to me and said, "Look at it, I've got nothing hid from you." And he meant it. That is the thing about my father that took me 11 months and $31,000 to learn. He was not hiding. He has never hidden anything in his life, because hiding is what you do when you think you have done something wrong. Page 4. Sale of real property, 2141 Selkirk Lake Road, $505,000, March of last year. My grandmother's house had a price, and it had a date, and both of them were typed in a font. Page 6 was not typed. Page 6 was handwritten, block capitals. The printing of a man who has filled out incident reports since the Carter administration, pressed so hard you could read it from the back of the sheet. Reimbursement for caregiving. 19 months, $118,000. I read that line maybe 6 times. My father did not steal from his mother's estate. My father invoiced it. He sat at this table, with this pen, and he priced 19 months of lifting her and crushing her pills and listening for her to choke. And he wrote himself a bill. And then he filed the bill in a tabbed binder where anybody could find it, because in his mind, he had done a job, and a job gets paid. My hands were steady. I want that on the record. I turned back to page 5, because there was a line on page 5 I had gone past too fast. Before I tell you what was on page 5, you need one September afternoon from 6 years earlier. Selkirk Lake, the dock, the water flat as a plate. Grandma Ruth was 83 and still driving, still swearing when she dropped a leech in the bottom of the boat, still making her own pie crust out of spite. I was 28 and home on leave for 9 days. She handed me a manila folder with her new will in it and told me to read the part she had marked. She had marked it in pencil, and the pencil went through 3 sheets, because she pressed like her son. The lake house, the lot, the frontage, all of it, to my granddaughter Laurel Ingram, by name. I actually argued with her. I said, "Give it to Bethany. Grandma. She's here. She'll use it. I'm never home." And my grandmother did not answer me for a long time. She took the leech out of the bucket. She put it on the hook. She dropped the line in the water and watched it. And then she said the thing that I would carry through 2 more rotations and 1 courtroom without ever once understanding it. "Don't let them pay you in nice words, Lori." That was all. She did not explain it. I laughed because I was 28 and I thought it was old woman talk, the kind of line you nod at and let go by. I said something like, "Okay, Grandma." And she said, "I mean it." And then she caught a base and forgot about me for 20 minutes. But she had said it like she was reading it off a page, like she already knew the shape of a thing that had not happened yet. It would take me 6 years and $140,000 in legal exposure to find out how she knew. Back at the table, pot roast going cold. I said, "She left it to me, Dad. My name is in it." She wrote my name. And my father did not raise his voice, because my father has never raised his voice in his life. That is not how he does damage. He reached over, turned the ledger around, and flipped it back to page 5. Consent to sale of specifically devised property, dated February 12th. And on the signature line, in that same block printing, it said, "Gordon R. Ingram, attorney in fact for Laurel A. Ingram. Attorney in fact." For me. Nobody forged anything. I want to be extremely clear about that, because I spent a lot of nights wishing they had. A forgery would have been simple. A forgery is a crime with a name and a police report and a person to hate. This was not a forgery. This was my father, using a piece of paper that I had walked into an office and signed myself, of my own free will, with my own hand, in the presence of a notary and a coffee stain. I gave him the pen. That is the whole story right there, and I could not say it out loud for another 6 months. And while I was sitting there with all the blood in my body somewhere down around my boots, my mother said the kindest, warmest, most annihilating thing anybody said to me that entire year. She said it from the sink, over running water, without any edge to it at all, because she genuinely thought she was helping me understand. "You weren't here, honey. Somebody had to sign." And that was the moment I remembered the room. Fluorescent lights, bad carpet, 40 soldiers in a hallway, and the specific smell of a copier that has been running for 2 days straight. Every soldier who deploys signs a power of attorney, every single one. It is not naivety, It is not sentiment. It is a line item on a checklist between your dental exam and your will, and if you do not have one, your rear detachment cannot pay your rent or move your truck or stop the utility company from shutting off a house you are not standing in. September, Fort Campbell, 6 days before Wheels Up. Our window moved left by almost a week. 40 of us in a hallway, 2 days, one exhausted paralegal specialist with a stack of forms. And I did the thing you are supposed to do. I asked for a limited one. I said, I only need the apartment and the truck. I asked twice. And the specialist looked up at me with the face of a man on hour 11 and said, Mom, limited takes 2 weeks to draft and route, and you fly Tuesday. Everybody's signing this one. It was 10 minutes to 5. I signed the general. That night, I called my father from the parking lot and I told him, in these exact words, only the apartment and the truck, Dad. And my father said, understood. And here is the part I need you to sit with, because it is the part that took me 11 months to survive. He was not lying to me. Gordon Ingram has never told a lie in his life. He does not have the equipment for it. He said understood, and he meant understood. And then, 16 months later, he sat down at a kitchen table and signed my name away on a house I had a legal right to. And if you had asked him that morning whether he was an honest man, he would have said yes. And he would have been telling the truth. I found him in the garage the next morning, changing the oil in a truck that did not need it. He did not look up. He talked to the underside of that engine for 4 minutes and gave me the entire architecture of his life, calm as a weather report. And I have thought about every sentence of it since. Somebody had to be here. That is how he opened. Then, you sent $400 a month. I changed my mother's diapers for 19 months. Which one of those do you figure cost more? Then, and this is the one that still gets me at 2 in the morning. In this town, Laurel, whoever stays gets the house. Whoever leaves gets a picture on the mantle. I didn't make that rule. He wiped his hands on a rag. He walked to the workbench. And he came back with an envelope. And in the envelope was a cashier's check for $60,000. And behind the check was a release, printed, stapled, with a date already on it. Your share, he said. Take it and we're square. I looked at that release for a long time. Not at the number, at the date, because the date was 3 days before I got home. He had printed it before I crossed the state line. He had known I was coming, and he had known what I would want, and he had a document waiting, which meant that in some room in his head, my father had already had this entire conversation with me, and had already won it, and had already forgiven me for it. I did not take the check. I asked him one question. When did you print this? And my father, the most honest man I have ever met, looked at the floor of his own garage and did not answer me. Casey ambushed me in the church parking lot 2 days later, which is where 13-year-olds do business in this town. My niece, Bethany's kid, born when my sister was 17, raised in the back booth of every restaurant Bethany ever worked in. She had a shoebox under her arm and she shoved it at me like it was on fire. Great-grandma's stuff, she said. I took it when they cleaned out the house. Nobody knows. Inside was a button, a dead kitchen timer, and a photograph. Casey and I have a thing that nobody in my family knows about, and that I have never told anybody until right now. For the 9 months I was in Poland, Casey texted me 61 times. About nothing. About a boy named Trevor. About her math teacher. About whether an axolotl counts as a lizard. At 2 in the morning her time because she never once figured out the 6-hour difference, and I never once told her to stop. 61 messages. I answered every single one, from a latrine, from a cot, from the back of a truck, and those were the only conversations I had that whole rotation where somebody wanted me, and not something from me. She stood there kicking a piece of gravel, and then she said, the only question in her whole family anybody had the guts to ask me directly. Are you gonna wreck my mom's restaurant? And I could have lied to her. She was 13. It would have been easy, and it would have been kind, and I could not do it. I said, I don't know, Casey. And she nodded like an adult, because she is one. And then she said, if you do it, Don't text me anymore. And then she ran. The way you run when you are 13 and you have just said the biggest thing you will say all year. I ate there. Of course I ate there. I sat at the counter on a Thursday at noon and watched my sister work, and I am going to tell you something that does not help my case at all. Bethany is good. Not okay. Good. She stood at that pass for 2 hours and she never stopped moving and she never lost the ticket rail once. And she called all 19 of her people by name, and she knew which line cook was 90 days sober and asked him about it in a voice nobody else could hear. And she knew which server had a kid with an ear infection and sent her home at 1 and covered the section herself. Her forearms are a topographical map of burns. My sister has worked 80 hours a week since she was 15 years old. Whatever you are picturing, a spoiled girl who got handed a restaurant, put it down. Nobody handed Bethany anything, ever, in her life. She takes. Then she saw me, and her whole face came apart with joy, real joy, no performance in it. And she came around that counter and hugged me so hard my stool moved, and she stepped back with her hands on my shoulders and said the thing. You see it? I named it for Grandma. The whole town says her name every day now. The whole town says her name every day. My sister paid our dead grandmother in a noun. She used her house and her money and her name, and she thought it was a monument. And she was so proud of herself that she was almost crying, and I sat there and looked past her at a brand new $16,000 range and did the math on a stove I had helped pay for, $2,200, 3 years ago, wired from a base in Georgia. If you have ever funded a life you were not invited into, tell me in the comments. I would like to know I am not the only one. The Register of Deeds for Marin County is in Cadillac, 31 miles south, in a basement with a public counter and a woman named Deb who has worked there since the Clinton administration. Certified copies are $4. That is what it costs to find out what your family did to you. $4 and about 9 minutes. There it was. Warranty deed, March 2141 Selkirk Lake Road, from the estate of Ruth M. Ingram, by Gordon R. Ingram, personal representative, to Dale W. Pruitt, $505,000. And attached, recorded right along with it, the consent. Consent of devisee, by attorney-in-fact, dated February 12th. I stood at that counter and I did something that I do not recommend. I pulled up my own duty log on my phone and I looked up February 12th. 6-hour time difference. While my father was sitting in a title company conference room in Cadillac, Michigan, signing my name onto a piece of paper that gave away my grandmother's house, I was an ocean away in a treatment room, putting 11 stitches into the forearm of a specialist named Ortiz, who had burned it on a vehicle exhaust and was more worried about his mother finding out than about his arm. That is what I was doing. That is where I was. While he was signing my name, I was holding somebody's arm together. I have thought about that a lot. Deb asked me if I needed anything else and I said no thank you, and I walked out into the parking lot and sat in my truck. And then I did the thing you do when you have no idea what you are doing. I opened the phone book on my phone and I called a lawyer because I did not know who else to call. Nora Bledsoe has 2 rooms above a physical therapy clinic, carpet from another century, and a coffee maker that predates me. She is 46. She does probate in a county where probate mostly means arguing about snowmobiles. She is not a hero. There is no scene in this story where Nora Bledsoe stands up and makes a speech. She read for 9 minutes without saying a word, and then she took off her glasses and told me the cruelest true thing anybody told me that year. I can't get you the house. Not ever. Not in any version of this. Pruitt is clean. He paid market. He went through a title company. He had no notice of any dispute, and the law protects him absolutely, and honestly, it should. Then she looked at me over the top of the file and said, "Don't hire me if that's what you want." I sat in that chair and felt the floor go. Because the house was the whole thing. The house was what I wanted. The actual pine and the actual dock, and the actual place my grandmother said would be somewhere to come back to. And it was gone. Not stolen, not recoverable, not pending. Gone. The way a person is gone. Somebody else's kids have a swing set on it. I did not know what I wanted anymore, and I said so out loud. Which for me is a medical event. And Nora pushed her glasses back up her nose and said the sentence that turned the entire next year of my life. But the money didn't evaporate, Sergeant. Money leaves a trail, and your father wrote all of it down. Selkirk Lake Road is 22 miles out of town, 35 minutes on a road I could drive in my sleep and have. August, late afternoon, the water flat, that specific northern light that makes everything look like a memory of itself. They had painted it. The cedar was gray my whole life, and now it was a soft blue, and there was a new dock, and there was a swing set in the side yard where my grandmother's raspberries had been. I parked. I walked up the porch steps I fell off of when I was 7. And I took the little brass key off my dog tag chain, the one she mailed to Kandahar, and I put it in the lock. It went in. It did not turn. I tried it 3 times. Slow. Like it was a mechanical problem and not a message. It went in, and it stopped. And I stood on that porch holding a real key to a real promise that opened exactly nothing. And if you want to know what my whole family is in one object, it is that. There is no lock on gratitude. Then the door opened from the inside. Dale Pruitt is 57, dish towel over his shoulder, and he did not call the police on the strange woman on his porch. He looked at the key in my hand and at my face, and he said, "You're the granddaughter." And then he poured me a cup of coffee and let me sit on his porch for 20 minutes. And somewhere in there he said the most devastating sentence of the entire year, and he said it kindly, with no idea what he was doing. "Your dad told me the whole family had signed off. He had a paper with your name on it." I asked him about it. He asked. This stranger asked. I got in my truck, and I got to the end of the driveway, and I put it in park, and for about 90 seconds I came apart. That was the only time. Then I wiped my face, and I pulled out, and I did not turn south toward Kentucky. I turned north, toward Alder Bay. I had spent 12 years being the one who leaves. I was about to find out I was very bad at the other thing. Staying, it turns out, is a paperwork problem. I burned my accrued leave first, then ordinary leave. Then I put in for leave without pay and had a conversation with my first sergeant that I would rather not reproduce. And then I rented a room above Dorsey's Hardware on Main Street for $340 a month. 1 window, a hot plate, a bathroom down the hall with a water heater that gave you about 4 minutes of opinion. And that window looked straight down onto the front of Ruth's table. So every night, from my bed, I could see my grandmother's face lit up from below like a saint, selling burgers on the street she complained about for 50 years. I did not have a plan. I want to be honest about that because people hear this story and think I came home with a strategy. I did not. I had a rented room and a hot plate and the entirely new sensation of being physically present in a town that had gotten used to me being a roomer. That is all I had. It turned out to be the only thing I had that was worth anything, and I did not know it yet, and neither did anybody else. My mother called on the 4th day, not to ask how I was. She said, "People at church are looking at us. How long are you planning to stay?" And I told her the truest thing I had said to my mother in 12 years. I don't know. There was a silence on that phone that went on so long I checked the screen, because my mother had no script for that. She had a script for the daughter who visits, and a script for the daughter who is far away and being proud of. She did not have one for a daughter who was just going to be there. Nobody in my family did. And within a week, the whole town changed the way it said hello to me. Nora filed in September. The petition asked the Marin County Probate Court for 3 things. 1, that the consent be declared void because an agent under a power of attorney owes a fiduciary duty to the person who gave it and cannot use it to benefit himself or his other family members. That is not a technicality. That is the entire point of the document. 2, a full accounting of the estate. 3, a constructive trust over whatever was left of the money, wherever it had gone. The clerk stamped it at 11:20 on a Tuesday morning. I was standing right there. It is a small, ugly, wet sound, a court stamp, and it is the sound of a family becoming a case number. That was the end of any version of this where we talked it out at a kitchen table. And my father reacted exactly the way I should have predicted, and did not. He did not call. He did not yell. He did not send a lawyer's letter to my rented room. He simply stopped acknowledging that I existed. Cleanly, completely, like turning off a breaker. I passed him at the gas station on Hale and he looked through me and put the nozzle back and drove off. And he was not performing. He was not making a point. He had just deleted me. For 4 months. My father did not fight me. He just went back to the only move he had ever practiced, which was pretending I was not in the state. And the terrible thing, the thing I could not say to Nora or anybody, was that he had learned it from me. I had taught him that. 12 years of it. And the first person to call me after we filed was not my father. It was Casey's shoebox, sitting on the floor of my rented room for 3 weeks before I could make myself open it. A button off a cardigan, a kitchen timer that died in about 2004, and a photograph. 1999. Me at 9 years old, standing on the Selkirk dock in a swimsuit 2 sizes too big, holding up a smallmouth bass roughly the size of a wallet, missing both front teeth and grinning like I had invented fish. My grandmother took that picture. I remember her taking it. And on the back, in that big slanted pencil that pressed through the paper, she had written something. Not a will. Not a codicil. Not anything a court would ever look at for 1 second, and I need you to understand that right now, because this is a story about a legal case, and this is not evidence. And it never became evidence, and Nora never even saw it. It said, Lori, 1999. She'll be the one who leaves. Make sure she has somewhere to come back to. She wrote that when I was 9. 9. Before the army, before the wire transfers, before any of it. My grandmother looked at a gap-toothed kid on a dock and saw the whole thing coming. And then she spent the next 20 years quietly trying to buy me an exit ramp, and she put it in her will in pencil that went through 3 sheets, and my family sold it in 11 months to pay for a stove. That is when I understood what she meant on the dock. She was not warning me about strangers. She had been watching her own son start to count things. I waited for my mother in the Grace Lutheran parking lot after the late service, which is a cheap thing to do, and I did it anyway. She came out with her tote bag and her bulletin, and she saw me, and her face did something complicated. And I did the hardest thing I had done in my adult life, harder than the courtroom, harder than any of it. And it took me about 4 seconds, and I had practiced it for 2 days. I asked her for something. Mom, I need you to say it to me. Just once. Say Grandma left it to me. And my mother looked at me with total love. Real love. I am not going to pretend otherwise. And she reached up and touched my face. And she said, Honey, we are so proud of you. You know that. But your father was here. And there it is. That was the answer. My mother's answer to a question about a will was a compliment. She did not say no. Nobody in my family has ever said no to me in my life. They just hand you a nice word and go get their car. She got to her car. She opened the door. And then she stopped and turned around and said the thing that would be sitting in my chest in a courtroom in January, 4 months later. Don't make me choose, Laurel. She had already chosen. She had chosen it before I landed. She just wanted me to be the one who said it out loud, so that when it was over, it would be my fault. That is how it works in my family. Somebody else does the taking. You do the asking. And then, you are the one who ruined Christmas. Here is where I have to tell you something ugly about myself, so stay with me. If you have made it this far, you already know this is not a story about a house. Hit subscribe and let us keep going, because the worst part is the part I did on purpose. Discovery came in October, and it came from my father, because he was the personal representative, and the personal representative has to produce the estate accounts. He handed us the rope himself, in a tabbed binder, because he still did not think he had done anything wrong, and there it was. On February 12th, the day he signed my name, my grandmother's estate was holding $71,000 in certificates of deposit. It also still owned her house in town, unsold, appraised at $96,000. Nobody was owed anything. There was no creditor, no tax bill, no emergency, no reason on this earth to touch that lake house, and here is the part the law is very clear about. A specifically devised piece of property, one left to a named person by name, is the last thing an estate is allowed to sell. Last. Behind the CDs, behind the other house, behind everything. It gets sold when there is nothing else left, and there was plenty else left. And the trail was right there in his own handwriting. 505,000 in. 340,000 out to Ruth's Table LLC, memo line, family loan. No promissory note, no interest, no schedule, no expectation of repayment on this earth. 118,000 to Gordon R. Ingram, memo line, caregiving reimbursement, 47,000 to fees and taxes. Nora put her pen down and looked at me and said, "Do you understand what this means for the restaurant?" And I said, "No." And she said, "You will." My sister came up the back stairs of Dorsey's Hardware at 11 at night still in her apron, and the whole stairwell smelled like fryer oil, and she did not beg. I want that understood. Bethany has never begged for anything in her life. She was furious, and she was articulate, and she had a case. "You left?" she said. I stayed. I have been washing dishes in this town since I was 15 years old. I was here when Grandma couldn't swallow. I was here when Dad couldn't get her up off the floor at 4 in the morning and called me, and I came in my pajamas. And you sent checks. And she stopped, and she looked right at me, and she put the knife exactly where it lived. You sent checks and you thought that was the same as paying. My sister did not know what she had just done. She had reached into my chest, found the thing I had spent 12 years and about $60,000 building a wall around, and said it out loud in a stairwell without even slowing down. Both of them were right about the first half. That is what nobody tells you. And then I asked her the only question I had. "Do you know where that money came from?" And Bethany stopped. 2 seconds too long. 2 full seconds. In a woman who does not hesitate. Ever. Who calls tickets at a pass under fire. And then she said, "Dad told me you agreed." She asked. That is what those 2 seconds were. My sister asked. One time, and she got the answer she wanted. And she stopped asking. And she went and bought a range. That is not a conspiracy. That is worse. That is what most people actually do. She stopped at the door with her hand on the frame, and she did not look back, and she said, "Don't do this. There are 19 people who eat off that place." My father's attorney is a man named Ellis Traeger, and he was polite to me for 2 hours in a conference room in Cadillac in a way I will remember when I am 80. He did not attack me. He did not need to. He had a folder, and in the folder were my own text messages, printed on letter paper, numbered in the corner like exhibits, because that is what they were. And he read them out loud, slowly, in a pleasant voice, and asked me if I had written them. March, 2 years back. Dad, just handle it. I can't deal with this from here. July, whatever you think is best. I trust you. November, sending 400 today. Sorry I can't do more. And then January. I don't think I can come. Tell Grandma I love her. 4 exhibits. Every one of them mine. Every one of them real. Nothing taken out of context, nothing edited, nothing shaded. In 40 minutes, that man built a portrait of me out of nothing but my own sentences, and the portrait was accurate, and it was exactly the woman my father said I was. That is the thing about the truth. It does not care whose side it is on. I sat there and answered yes. I wrote that. Yes, that is mine. Yes, I said that. And I watched whatever moral advantage I thought I had walk out of the room. And across the table my father did not smile. He did not gloat. He looked almost sorry for me, and he said it quietly, mostly to himself. The way you say a thing you have said 10,000 times. Somebody had to be here. I walked out to the parking lot and I sat in my truck for 25 minutes without turning the key. I texted Casey that night. It sent. No read receipt. I texted her the next day. Something dumb. Something about her axolotl, the kind of thing that had gotten an instant reply from Poland at 2 in the morning for 9 straight months. Nothing. On Thursday, I drove past the middle school at 3:15, not to talk to her, just to see her. And she was on the front steps with her friends, and she looked up, and she saw my truck. And she turned around. 13 years old, and she put her back to me on purpose, in front of everybody, which is the most expensive thing a 13-year-old owns. That night, a message came from Bethany's number. Stop texting my daughter. And then, underneath it, time-stamped 1:14 in the morning, one more came through from Casey's own phone before it went dark for good. I thought you were the good one. That was it. That was the last thing my niece said to me. 61 messages in a latrine in Poland, and that is where it ends. I sat in my rented room with the lights off, and looked out the window at my grandmother's face glowing on Main Street, and I want to tell you I had some clarifying moment of resolve. I did not. I sat on the floor with my back against the bed for a long time and did not move. That was the bottom. Not the deposition. Not the deed. A kid deciding I was the villain and being about 60% right. The next morning, Traeger called Nora with a new number. $150,000, paid over 5 years, in exchange for dismissing the petition, signing a release, and a mutual agreement never to discuss the matter again. Nora laid it on the desk between us, and she did not sell it to me, and she did not soften it. This is real money, she said. You have $31,000 to your name. My retainer is $31,000. If you go forward and you lose, you have nothing, and you still lose them. She took her glasses all the way off. As your attorney, I'm advising you to take it. My own lawyer told me to take it. That is where I was. There was not one human being in the state of Michigan on my side of that table. Not my mother, not my sister, not my niece, not my father, not my attorney. I sat with that offer for 6 hours in a rented room above a hardware store. 12 years of savings. That is what $31,000 is. It is not much, and the reason it is not much is that I had wired the rest of it, $400 at a time, into that exact family. I wrote the check for the whole thing and slid it across her desk. Every dollar I had, gone, in favor of a lawsuit my own lawyer thought I would lose. Nora looked at it for a second before she picked it up, and she asked me the only question worth asking. Why? And I said the truest thing I have ever said out loud, because they have never once had to hear me say no. November. My re-enlistment window opened and started closing, and I let it. Master Sergeant Ocampo called me twice from Fort Campbell, and the second time he left a message that just said, "Ingram, call me back, don't be stupid," and I sat there and listened to it and did not call him back. 12 years, 68 whiskey, the only thing I have ever been genuinely excellent at. And more than that, and this is the part that took me until a courtroom to see, the Army was the only institution on earth that took my leaving and gave it a different name. In the Army, leaving is called deployment. It comes with orders and a flight manifest and a thank you and a ribbon. Everywhere else it is called abandonment. For 12 years I had been paying a lot of money and a lot of years for the privilege of being gone in a way that nobody was allowed to call gone. I folded my ACUs the last time, the way you do it, sharp. And I put them in a duffel, and I put the duffel under the bed in a rented room above a hardware store in a town I ran away from at 22. And then I was just a woman who would not go home. Nobody thanks you for that. There is no ribbon for that. The window closed on a Friday, and on the following Monday the court set the hearing for January 14th. 2 in the morning, January 13th, rented room, legal pad. Nora's instruction was simple and correct. Do not concede anything. Traeger will try to make you admit you abandoned them. Answer short. Answer narrow. Do not give it to him. That is good lawyering. That is what you pay $31,000 for. And I sat there with the photograph from the shoebox propped against the lamp, me at 9, gap-toothed, holding a fish, And I heard my grandmother on that dock as clearly as if she was in the room. Don't let them pay you in nice words, Lori. And I understood something inconvenient about the courtroom I was walking into in 7 hours. Every person who would be in that room had stayed somewhere. The judge, the clerk, the bailiff, the 2 strangers waiting on the next case. Every single one of them had a mother or a father or a brother they had sat with, and they had all been paid for it in exactly nothing. And they would hear my father say somebody had to be here, and they would feel it in their spine. If I stood up there and fought the part that was true, they would bury me. And they would be right to. I could not be believed about the second half if I lied about the first half. So I tore off everything I had written, and I wrote 1 sentence on a clean page, and I looked at it for about an hour. Nora told me not to give them the one thing they wanted. At 2 in the morning, I decided to hand it to them first, out loud, on the record, before anybody could take it from me, and hope it bought me the only thing I actually needed. The Marin County probate courtroom is small. People think courtroom and they think marble. This is 4 rows of pews, a low ceiling, yellow wood paneling from about 1974, and a steam radiator against the wall that bangs like somebody is in there with a wrench. Judge Arlen Voss is in his 60s, slow, courteous, entirely unimpressed by everyone. My mother sat in the 2nd row. Bethany sat next to her in kitchen clogs, because she does not own other shoes. Casey was not there. My father sat in the 1st row across the aisle in a button-down shirt. Because that is what you wear. Out of respect, in his opinion, for a proceeding. And Traeger put him on the stand and let him talk about 19 months. And my father talked. He described learning how to lift his own mother without hurting her, which is a skill, and it takes about 3 weeks to learn, and I know because I have taught it. He described crushing pills into applesauce. He described lying in the next room at night, listening for the sound of her choking, which is a sound you cannot describe to somebody who has not heard it, and do not have to describe to somebody who has. And then he said the one that finished the room. There was a night, he said, that he sat in his own driveway in his truck for 40 minutes because he could not make himself walk in the door. And then he walked in the door. Because if I don't go in, he said, nobody goes in. And my father came apart on that stand. Not theater. Laurel Ingram put one of those big cracked hands over his face in front of the county and could not talk for a while. And that courtroom believed him. And here is what I have never told anybody. So did I. I am a medic. I know exactly what 19 months of that costs, in a way that nobody else in that room could possibly know, right down to the specific gravity of it. I could not fight him on it. I did not want to fight him on it. Then Traeger asked him if he had any regrets. And my father wiped his face and said, I regret that my daughter wasn't here. Even crying, he was still writing the invoice, and I looked around that little room and I understood I was losing. Everybody in there had stayed somewhere. Nobody in there had ever been paid for it. Nora called me. I walked up. I sat down. I said the oath. And across the room, Traeger squared up his 4 sheets of paper, my own text messages, ready to go. And I did not wait for a question. I looked at Judge Voss and I said it. Your Honor, before we start. My father is right. I stayed away. I could not stand that house without her, and I let him carry it by himself for 19 months, and I sent money instead of showing up, and everything he told you about me is true, and I would like it in the record. And then I let it sit for a second, because I had practiced this one part, and then I said the rest of it. It does not make my grandmother's will a suggestion. The radiator banged. Nobody moved. Ellis Traeger had spent 4 months building a house out of 4 pieces of paper, and I had walked over and handed him the bricks, and there was nothing left in that folder that could hurt me, because I had already said the worst of it in my own voice before he could put it in my mouth. I felt the old version of me die right there, publicly, on the record, and I do not have a nicer way to say it. The daughter who was away on duty and blameless. Gone. I killed her myself with 1 sentence, and I cannot ever get her back. Then Nora did the only thing that actually mattered in 11 months of this. She recalled my father. 3 questions. Mr. Ingram, did you ask your daughter before you signed her name? No. Did you call her? Text her? Email her? She had internet in Poland, didn't she? A long pause. Yes. Then why didn't you ask her? And my father looked at me. Right at me. Across that little room. And he answered honestly, because he is an honest man, and because he believed with his whole chest that it was the correct answer. Because she wasn't here. And Nora said very quietly, without any drama at all, Your Honor, my client is sitting in the first row. That was the case. That was all of it. Not a document, not a smoking gun, not some secret paper falling out of an envelope. My father's entire legal position, the thing that let him put his pen on my name, was that I was permanently, reliably, forever absent. He had 12 years of evidence. He was not wrong to believe it. And the only thing on earth that could break it was a thing I could not wire, could not sign over, could not send. My body. In the room. Voss tapped his pen twice on the file and said, I'll rule after lunch. 1:40. Voss came back in and read it slowly, without any theater, the way you read a parts list. But before he ruled, he did a small polite thing, and he had no idea, none, that he was doing anything at all. He looked up over his glasses and he said, Sergeant Ingram, before I rule, thank you for your service. And I sat there in that pew and I heard it. The same sentence my sister sent me from a scaffold in May. The same sentence the girl at Dorsey's says when she rings up my coffee. The same sentence from a man in a robe with the power to give me back my grandmother's estate or take it away forever. Free, unlimited, everywhere. It is the only currency in this country that nobody ever runs out of, and that is exactly why they hand it to you. Then he ruled. The consent. Void. An agent under a power of attorney owes a fiduciary duty to his principal, and Gordon Ingram used his daughter's power of attorney in a transaction that benefited himself and his other daughter, and that is self-dealing, and it is void, and the court said so in one flat sentence without looking up. The personal representative breached his duty by selling specifically devised property, while the estate held $71,000 in liquid assets and an unsold house, with no creditor pressing and no necessity of any kind. The property itself, not recoverable. Dale Pruitt is a bona fide purchaser and his title is good, and he keeps the house, forever, and that door stays blue. And then Voss read the line that emptied the room of air. The proceeds are impressed with a constructive trust in favor of the petitioner. That includes the assets and equity of Ruth's Table, LLC. My sister went out of her chair. Not a faint, exactly. Her legs just stopped participating and she slid, and my mother caught her under the arm, and somebody in the back said, "Oh my God," out loud, and Voss tapped the gavel once, not hard, the way you tap a table to bring people back. And then he did the procedural thing that turned my win into a knife. Counsel, the court will not permit double recovery. Your client will elect her remedy. On the record. Today. I had wanted somebody to hand me the thing that was mine for 11 months. He handed it to me. And then he asked me who I wanted to burn for it. Nora turned and gave it to me fast and quiet because we had about 90 seconds. 2 doors. Door 1, a money judgment against my father personally. The $118,000 he still had, plus the house on Hale Street, which is worth about $150,000. That door takes my parents out of the house I grew up in, at 63 and 61, and it lets my sister keep her restaurant. Door 2, the constructive trust. Ruth's Table, LLC. The building, the equity, the equipment, the whole thing. That door makes me whole exactly, to the dollar my grandmother intended. And it erases the only thing my sister has ever built in her life, and it puts 19 people out of work, and it lets my parents keep their house. 90 seconds, Nora said. Pick who? And I looked down at the table. The blue ledger was sitting there in evidence, open to page 6, my father's block printing pressed through the paper. Reimbursement for caregiving. 19 months. $118,000. And my phone was face up in my lap, and it was open, because I had been looking at it in the hallway, to my transfer history. 400, 400, 400. 6,000 for the roof. 2,200 for the stove. 400, 400, 400. 12 years of it, scrolling forever. 2 columns of numbers, the same handwriting. My father billed for showing up. I had been billing for staying away. Neither one of us had been in this family since 2013. We had been invoicing it, and from the second row, my mother said it, so quietly that I am the only person in that room who heard her, and she was not angry. She was just telling me the price. If you do this, don't come back. And my father, who had not looked at me in 4 months, said it to the air in front of him one last time. Somebody had to be here, and I answered him. Not sharp, not clever. I had nothing clever, and this is the most important thing I said in 11 months. Because it is not a comeback, it is a surrender. I know, Dad. That's the part I can't argue with. And then, from a doc in September, from a woman who saw all of this coming when I was 9 years old and holding a fish. Don't let them pay you in nice words, Lori. I stood up. And that little courtroom is so old that the pews creak, so everybody in it heard me stand up, and there was no way on this earth to do this quietly, and my sister was breathing the way people breathe right before they go down, and I counted it, because I am a medic, and I cannot not count it, even then, even her. Your Honor. The petitioner elects the constructive trust. I took the restaurant, and I want you to understand what happened in that 1 second, both halves of it, at the same time. I got my grandmother's estate, whole, on the record, with a judge's name on it, and I got something I never went looking for, which is that for the first time in 34 years I asked my family for something instead of sending them something. The taking was the showing up. It was the same act. And in that same second I lost my mother. On purpose. By choice. Wide awake. I lost my sister. I lost Casey. I lost the one thing I had actually been in the room to protect, which was my idea of myself as the good one, the one who never asks. I walked out of that courtroom as a woman I am not sure I like. And here's the joke my grandmother would have loved. I won a restaurant in Alder Bay. Which means the court, in its wisdom, sentenced me to be present every single day in the exact town I spent 12 years and 2 continents running away from. I got the one thing I had been hiding from my whole life. The transfer took 6 weeks. Paperwork, an accountant, a receiver, a woman with a clipboard measuring a walk-in cooler. My sister did not fight it. On the last day, she came in at 6 in the morning, hung her apron on the hook by the office, set her keys on the cutting board, and walked out the front. She did not say anything. Bethany has never said another word to me. Not one, not since. And I want to be clear that there is no scene later where she does. I kept the 19. Not because I am generous, because I cannot cook. I can put in 11 stitches in a moving vehicle and I cannot make a hollandaise, and keeping those people was the only decision available to me that did not require asking anybody's permission. My father kept the house on Hale Street. I want that on the record too. I let him keep it. And the way I let him keep it was by taking it out of my sister instead, and I have never once been able to make that arithmetic feel clean. He never thanked me. He has never called. I passed him at Dorsey's in April and he looked through me and paid for his washers and left, which is exactly what I did to him for 12 years. He learned it from me. Casey said nothing. My mother's church closed around her like a hand. Around town, I am the Ingram girl who sued her own father, and that is what I will be at my funeral. And it is not even inaccurate. And the girl at Dorsey's still says thank you for your service every time she rings up my coffee. Cheerful. Every time. And she has never once asked me over for dinner, and she never will. And there is nothing wrong with her. That is just the deal. My grandmother is still dead. The lake house door is still blue. Dale Pruitt has a swing set where the raspberries were, and he is entitled to it. Nothing I did fixed anything. The thing I went up against did not lose 1 inch of ground anywhere in Marin County. And so at 35 years old, I was out of the Army. No career, no savings, no family. Standing in a kitchen I never wanted, in a town I ran away from, 6 o'clock every single morning. In March, it rained for 9 days. On the 6th one, I borrowed a ladder from Dorsey's, set it up on the sidewalk in front of my own building, and took my grandmother's name off the front of it myself. One letter at a time. Gold, screwed into the fascia, the screws already going rusty, my hands going numb, water coming off the awning down the back of my collar. It took 2 hours. Not because I hated my sister. Because my grandmother's name was the last thing this family still had left to spend. I left the board blank. People ask, and I tell them I have not thought of one yet, which is a lie. I am just done paying in names. And I took the little brass key off my dog tag chain and put it in the drawer under the register, and it still does not open anything, and it does not have to anymore. In April, my niece pushed the door open at 4 in the afternoon and did not say a word to me. She walked to a dirty two-top, wiped it down, squared the chairs, exactly the way her great-grandmother used to do it, and then she left. No hug, no forgiveness, nothing. She came back the next Thursday, and the Thursday after that. They will never run out of nice words. That is the entire trick of them. They cost nothing to print, and they are always in stock. So if somebody owes you a piece of your own life, do not stand there waiting to be thanked for it. Walk into the room, stand where they have to look at you, and say the number out loud, because the only thing on this earth you cannot mail home and cannot sign over to somebody else, and can never, ever be paid for in gratitude, is your own body in the doorway. A brass key that opens nothing, a handwritten invoice for 19 months, gold letters coming off a board in the rain. If you have ever been paid in pride and told it was a gift, then you already know what my sister's message cost her. Tell me in the comments, would you have elected the trust or let them keep it? And subscribe, because next week somebody else finally stops being grateful.